It was a cold, quiet Tuesday morning, November 3rd, 1995. In the heart of London, the notorious Midwest Bank sat in the bustling financial district, its towering glass windows reflecting the skyline. Inside, the employees were going about their day, sipping their coffees, typing reports, and occasionally looking up to see another suited business person rush past. Little did they know, today would be the day their lives changed forever. At precisely 9 a.m., the bank's security alarm system had a brief malfunction, a glitch that would normally go unnoticed by the average employee. But for the mastermind behind the operation, it was the signal. As the doors swung open and the clock ticked past the hour, 4 men dressed in meticulously tailored suits entered the bank. Their faces were hidden by black masks, but their eyes were sharp, scanning every inch of the place. Among them was John Fisher, the brains behind the heist. At 38 years old, John had spent the last decade studying financial institutions, analyzing their vulnerabilities, and devising ways to beat them. He had no criminal record, no obvious ties to underworld figures, but his mind was a weapon that could take down even the most fortified establishments. The second man, Carl "Akuma the Brawn" Daniels, was his right-hand man, a former boxer turned security consultant. Carl's imposing 6 feet 4 inches frame and his cold, calculating demeanor made him the perfect muscle for a job like this. He was the one who would intimidate the guards, control the situation, and make sure nobody got in their way. Then there was Michael, the engineer, Smith, a quiet and unassuming genius. Michael had worked in various tech fields before, learning the ins and outs of security systems, bank vaults, and alarm systems. He could hack anything, and on this day, his skill would prove invaluable. Lastly, Victor, the Shadow White, the getaway driver. Victor had a reputation for making clean exits, vanishing without a trace. He could drive anything from luxury cars to motorcycles, and no one ever suspected he was the one behind the wheel. As the doors closed behind them, the men moved swiftly. The bank was busy, but it was their timing that made this heist possible. They were dressed in expensive, inconspicuous suits, blending in with the crowd of bankers and business owners. They didn't rush. They didn't yell. John Fisher, calm and composed, approached the main counter. "Good morning," he said to the cashier, a young woman named Emma, who was busy sorting out some documents. She looked up, slightly startled, and smiled politely. Before she could respond, Carl stepped forward, blocking her line of sight. He pulled out a small but menacing handgun, the kind that was more about intimidation than harm. "No sudden movements, love," he growled. "This is a robbery. Do as we say and no one gets hurt." Meanwhile, John moved quickly, pulling a small device from his pocket. The device emitted a soft beep, and within seconds, he hacked into the bank's security system. The cameras, the alarm systems, and the electronic locks were all under his control now. He was the ghost in the machine, pulling strings from behind the scenes. Michael, the tech specialist, took a few steps forward, his eyes glued to his tablet screen. He was the one in charge of bypassing the vault's complicated locking mechanism. "It's all set," he said quietly to John, nodding to indicate that the vault was ready for access. The operation was moving smoothly, but they had one last obstacle: the armed guards. As the vault doors creaked open, John knew it was time for Carl to step in. He looked to Carl, who gave a subtle nod in return. Carl approached the security desk, his movements deliberate and menacing. The 2 guards on duty, Paul and James, looked up in alarm. Before they could react, Carl raised his gun, not to shoot, but to assert dominance. He wasn't there to kill. He was there to make sure they understood one thing: they were in charge. "Stay put," Carl said. "We don't want trouble, just stay still." Paul, the younger of the 2 guards, hesitated. His finger twitched toward his belt, reaching for the emergency alarm button. Carl's eyes flicked to his hand, and in an instant, he was on top of Paul, slamming the younger guard into the desk, rendering him motionless. Victor, who had been keeping an eye on the outside, gave a quick signal. The getaway plan was in motion. John and Michael began moving toward the vault, their steps calculated. The money inside wasn't just going to be handed out. They had meticulously planned every detail. The vault wasn't just a container, it was a fortress. But for them, it was nothing more than a small challenge. John took a deep breath and motioned for Michael to begin. Michael worked the controls, typing in a sequence of numbers. The sound of the vault door unlocking echoed through the room. Inside, stacks of cash sat waiting for them. They began to load the money into large duffel bags. Each bag was carefully filled, weighed, and sealed. The process was quick but deliberate. Every detail mattered. They weren't just after the money, they were after perfection. Outside, Victor was ready. The black van, disguised as an innocuous delivery vehicle, was idling quietly just out of sight. Victor had a special system in place to make sure there would be no tracking devices left behind. He had set up false plates, and even his route had been mapped out to avoid any security checkpoints. As the last duffel bag was secured, John gave a quick nod to Michael. Time to go. The four men moved out swiftly, leaving the scene as silently as they had entered. But the chaos was just beginning. Back at the bank, the employees were in shock, unable to comprehend what had just transpired. The alarms were finally going off, but by then, it was far too late. The police, who had been stationed nearby for a routine check, arrived at the scene just moments after the robbers had disappeared. Detective Laura Fields, a seasoned investigator, was the first to step onto the scene. She scanned the area, her mind already piecing together the events. There was one clue that stood out: the bank's security footage. But there was a problem. It was blank. The cameras had been disabled. Someone had done their homework, and they had done it well. Whoever did this, they knew exactly what they were doing, Laura muttered to herself. This wasn't just a robbery. This was something much bigger. The next few hours were tense. The police combed the area for any sign of the robbers. But John and his team had covered their tracks perfectly. They had left no fingerprints, no DNA, no evidence of their involvement. Even the surveillance footage had been erased remotely. John Fisher and his team had spent years preparing for this moment. Every detail, every move had been rehearsed. They were not just after money, they were after a legacy. But the real test was yet to come. As the night drew closer, John and his team gathered at their safe house on the outskirts of the city. They took a moment to breathe, to look at the bags of cash, and to realize the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. "This is it," John said, his voice low but triumphant. "We did it." But even as he spoke, his mind was already turning. The police would be on their tail soon. They wouldn't stop until they found the men responsible for the perfect heist. But John wasn't worried. He knew that they had planned for this too.